This is Authentic.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Authentic. Scott Roger Chafian with you here, and we are at the beginning of our C-130 series of episodes. You may recall we started this with the F-100, and you'll get an episode on airframes that revolve around how you can experience the airframe through simulation, primarily through Digital Combat Simulator, DCS, an episode on aeronautics and aerodynamics and systems, and then one on history. But as I said, this is the episode on experiencing the C-130. With me here today, I've got Brian Sunshine Sinclair, who most of you listeners know. I've got Baltic Dragon, who, if you play DCS, I guarantee you know who he is. And if you don't, go look up some Baltic Dragon videos. And last but not least, saving the best for last, I've got Matt Delaney, who's the developer of the C-130 module. So I'm just going to go around the horn here and let you guys give a brief hello and intro. Sunshine, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate the invite. It's really cool kind of getting the band back together. I haven't worked with BD since, I think, Fighter Pilot Podcast. So pretty cool. And Matt, nice to meet you. For the folks at home, just a retired F-18 test pilot, works with weapons. Did work with weapons in uniform, air launched stuff, and now work with similar weapons, both training the fleet with what is already operationally has IOC, so initial operational capability. It's out there in the fleet already, as well as we develop some new stuff. Right now, we're looking at fast things, so we care about hypersonics. So, and then I just love authentic media and being helped to teach folks about some aero stuff.
Awesome. And I'll do just a quick outside the OPSEC bubble. If you've read the news in the past 2 years, you've read about Sunshine's efforts, and I'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough.
Yeah. BD, Baltic Dragon, or BD?
Yeah, BD. It's easier. That's because my real name is in Polish and nobody can pronounce it really. But
smart, very smart.
Yeah, it's great to be back with the team. And I've been with the team with Fighter Pilot Podcast for a long time. I'm working on DCS and have been working for DCS for some time on missions, campaigns, and that's how I came to know Matt, because I've been working on the training missions for the C-130, which I think should help you get into this module. So happy to be here with everyone. Hey, guys.
Happy to have you. Matt, over to you.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Matt Delaney. I am the CEO of the airplane simulation company, but in that capacity, I'm the person that wrote most of the code for the module. And as BD said, we've been working together on some training missions and other content that hopefully will help people get comfortable with the plane. But I've been working on this for the last couple of years, and obviously, we released it a few weeks ago, and excited to get it in everybody's hands and talk about it here.
All right. Well, I'll just start off. Everyone listening is probably familiar with the C-130, but we'll just jump in with a brief history. I personally don't think the C-130 gets all of the credit and credibility it deserves. People talk about how long the B-52 is going to be serving by the time we're done. Well, the C-130 has been around since 1956. Shows no signs of slowing down. I'm pretty sure that when the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek is decommissioned, C-130s will be part of the flyover that does that. And it was designed in a post-World War II environment to enter into the Cold War, and it has successfully made the transition from Cold War to low-intensity conflict. We're now looking at peer-level conflict support. It has done transport duties. It's done combat delivery duties. It's done gunship duties. It's done command and control. It's done refueling. It could do it with short takeoff and landing. It's a plane that's just about done it all. So it's really fascinating to think about how you can experience this mission. And I will tell you, I'm basically going to try and stay out of the way for this episode because we have three much smarter, much more interesting people than me here to talk. I'm not who you want to hear talking about the C-130, but I'll say two really quick things to kick us off. One is that when I was at the Army Staff College in 2003, and everyone on our class, a lot of guys had just come from the kickoff of OIF, and no notice, we had an assembly, and it was for the General Petraeus, I believe, came down. He came down several times, but this was one time. General Petraeus came down, and General Wallace, William Wallace, who commanded the Corps and had come down to the school to present the Distinguished Flying Cross to one of my classmates who had been flying a C-130 on the opening night to deliver a Special Forces team, had an in-flight emergency, and they decided it was such a critical mission. He landed it in the desert. The crew chief managed to resolve whatever was going on, took back off out of the desert, and delivered his team where they were going. Like, all props to the crew, because that's who made that happen, and to the maintainers. But that's what the C-130 is capable of. And the second thing is, I've downloaded the C-130. I've now played it. I am by no means a DCS expert, but Matt, the level of detail, the visuals in this thing, and we're going to get into it, are just incredible. And BD, I was telling you before we started, thank you so much for the tutorial, because if I had not had that, man, I would probably be like a week into the manual, still trying to figure it out. I have served on CGs and DDGs, and I think it's almost as hard to get the C-130 started as it is to get a DDG cold start from the pier, which that's a whole nother story on 9/11. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. And Matt, I want to ask you to start. What drove you to decide to model the 130 and the J model in particular? I should mention you did model the J, and so I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, the C-130 is a special plane. It's obviously an incredibly iconic plane for the reasons you mentioned. It's been in service for more than 50 years. But I think it's also a much more interesting plane than a lot of people think. I think there's a perception among some people that it's like this kind of strategic airlifter, right? You would, fly from Nebraska with like tons of aluminum or something. And it's not. It's a tactical plane. It flies low into dangerous places, gets shot at, and does all kinds of exciting missions. But for me, actually, the journey sort of started actually from playing DCS. I was it was during the pandemic, and I was bored, needed a hobby, and I started to play DCS. And I met some friends, and I work in software, so I started making a scripted multiplayer mission. And I wanted this idea of logistics that was this kind of standard multiplayer mission where you start with a foothold in some part of the map, and you fight your way across, capturing bases as you go. But what annoyed me was that we would capture these bases, and they would have all these Fox 3 missiles, these AIM-120s. And I have it on some authority that Russians or Syrians or whoever the Red Force is, they don't normally keep AIM-120Cs free there. They actually don't keep them at all. And so I wanted this idea of a resource economy and some kind of scarcity in this mission. And this is like a very standard thing. There's nothing particularly, interesting about this mission other than that it was mine. So we did what most people do, which is we modified CTLD, which is this logistics sort of scripting hook for DCS, to consider the TF-51 as a cargo plane. And it kind of worked, right? It's like slow and not going to defend itself. But that kind of didn't stick. And so I discovered that there was a free mod of the C-130, the Anubis mod. And I got involved in that. I put it in the mission, thought it was great. But then I started to work on some of the features of that project, like the nav radar page and some other things. And at some point, we'd put a ton of effort into this particular MFD page called TAWS, which is the Terrain Avoidance Warning System. And TAWS is a display that basically shows you a bunch of boxes on a screen. And the boxes are different colors. And a good rule of thumb is if you're flying a C-130 and you have the TAWS page up and you see a red box in front of you, you're about to crash and die, because that means the elevation is above you. If it's blue and you fly into that, then you'll drown because that's water. If it's green or black, everything's going to be fine. If it's yellow, it depends, But we had built this thing, and it was very complicated to build in the DCS free mod environment because you don't have access to basically to write this code in C++. And so we'd done all these elaborate things to make it work. And at some point, I just sort of stopped and I was like, wait, what are we doing here? This is all very elaborate and kind of ridiculous. Maybe we should just get a license and, do the real thing. So I called up some people at ED and said, hey, I'm interested in making a C-130. I'm not going to, these are my credentials in terms of making software and working in technology. You can take it or leave it. Like, do you want to do it? And they said yes. And that's kind of the origin story. And we thought we thought we'd be done in a few months. That was not the case. We kept learning more and more things that the C-130 did, and it was quite a process. But now we're here.
So, what led you to the J model?
Yeah, so I mean, the J model, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, I'll give you, I guess, maybe the pragmatic reasons and then the business reason. I mean, the business reason is that people like MFDs. Things that are newer on average will sell better than things that are older. There are a lot of people that have some nostalgia for steam gauges and whatever, but as a rule, people will like newer things. But then there's also a practical matter, which is that you really can't operate an H model C-130 by yourself. Like you really cannot. Like if you want to do CARP, which is, well, actually, I don't even know if they called it CARP in the H, because CARP stands for computer assisted release point. So that's where you put where you want the airdrop load to land into a computer and all kinds of other information. And then it tells you where you should cut the straps. That thing will come out. In the C-130H, you did that with like a piece of paper. Like, Navigator would do that by hand, things of that nature. And so it would really not have been workable to operate as a single player. And I think that the J obviously is kind of the definitive version of this aircraft. People often ask, like, is it going to get JATO? And, the thing with the J is it's not going to get JATO because it doesn't need JATO, because an H with JATO produces less thrust than a J without it. I mean, that's the kind of power that this thing produces. So it's really kind of the definitive C-130 variant, in my mind, at least.
That makes a lot of sense to me. That's like good reasons. And I agree, the new tech sells better. And what was really interesting to me, just starting to learn the module, is, how much goes into it in terms of flying whatever. As you said, everyone just sort of thinks as, oh, well, it's a cargo plane. We're almost at the ultimate iteration of, the C-47s that misdropped guys all over Normandy on D-Day, right? Because they're doing the best they can, but they don't have the nav systems. They don't have the computers. And, we're in a world where we're expecting to precision drop anything from people to ordnance to supplies. So, that makes a lot of sense. While you were doing that, what did you have access to from, I'll say, the real world community? Like, what limitations did you have? What resources were there for getting into the plane?
So at first, very little. At first we had the Dash 1 and we didn't know anybody. My dad was an airline pilot. He flew airliners, but I didn't know anybody in the C-130 community. And the thing about the C-130 in particular, this is also true of other planes, but it's particularly true of the C-130, and it's that the manual is complete trash. It's just terrible. I mean, it describes like vaguely what the aircraft does, and sometimes it's even correct, but oftentimes it won't describe things at all, or it will describe them in ways that are just like comically thin. And so you can't really just make the aircraft with the manual. I mean, we have this joke about the guy that wrote the manual can tell like when he's having a good day, he's like really hitting on all cylinders, like things make sense, it's detailed, and there's other days where you can just tell he's just mailing it in, So we started with that. And, but then as often is the case, you start to meet people. And we started to talk to various folks that either work on these as maintainers or fly them as active duty air crew. And so over the course of, I guess, 2 years, we really built up a pretty solid group of SMEs that, were able to get us access to things in really amazing ways. So this is probably easiest to understand in the context of like the 3D model. I mean, like we'd be making the 3D model and, the artist would be like, can somebody hold a protractor up to that window frame and like, tell me what the angle of that joint is, or, in centimeters, like how wide is that? And, like 15 minutes later, somebody would post a picture of the Discord of, protractor, whatever we'd asked for. And so we had really amazing access that way. But really with these kinds of projects, like if you really, really, really care about the details, if you truly aspire for the product to be, good enough that actual air crew could use it as a training tool, and we did here, you have to go way beyond the books. There's all kinds of things that can't be quantified. You spend hours, watching, videos of, the input rate of text to the screen. What is the refresh rate on these displays, and all these other factors that kind of all build up to the feeling of really being there. And so I had a chance to fly a sim, and we had a chance to also go out and record sounds. We got an amazing, I mean, it took us like 3 years, but finally the Air Force stopped ignoring our emails and granted our request to go stick a bunch of microphones around a C-130. And, we got just incredible access to that for about 2 days to generate the sound set. And that was another really awesome thing. But in the end, yeah, I mean, you start with the manuals and you do all the things that those say. but there's a lot more to it than that. And it wouldn't have been nearly as good or as accurate as it is if we hadn't had engagement from all those folks. And I'm obviously biased, but I think we were able to get such engagement from them because we appeared to actually care. We did and do. And a lot of the time they would tell me things that I really didn't want to hear. They would tell me things like, it's totally wrong in, this particular way. And it's really easy as a developer to say, well, no one will really care about that. It's a consumer product and doesn't matter. But, that's not really the approach we took here. I mean, the motto was, if the plane does it, if the real one does, then we will model that. Like, there are not really things in this module that are missing. I mean, there's things that are maybe rougher around the edges than they will be in a few months, but like there are really not things that the real aircraft does that this one simply has omitted. And I think that's part of why we were able to get the engagement from the aircrew guys that we did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, people love their platforms, no matter what, be it an aircrew, a maintainer, ship guys, weapons guys, they love their platforms. And when you come to it with that sort of attitude that you're discussing, people want to help. So that's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to playing it more because just in the initial, get it started, taxi it, take off, it felt legitimate. Like, as I said, I'm not a pilot. I've flown in C-130s before, and just in the back, obviously, but just from that, it felt real. Right? Like, I don't have reference points for the other DCS aircraft. So, I did a midshipman flight. My midshipman flights were in prowlers. We don't have those. I've never flown in P-51, an F-4, an F-14, an F-16, so on and so forth. I've been in C-130s. It feels and looks like a C-130. So more credit to you
it's a very visceral plane. I mean, I've joked, like, it's a completely savage airplane. Like, you could never charge customers money to fly on that thing. Yeah. It's loud. It's, it's no, I mean, there was this moment we were doing the sound recording. And so they were doing engine runs because we wanted to get, all the way through takeoff power and full reverse. And so, I wanted to stand on the flight deck when they were doing this because I wanted to hear it from the inside. We had the sound guys were all around the outside, but they start this thing and I had been in them, but I had never been in one as it started. And the thing starts, bouncing, it's all this turbulent airflow coming over the back of the wings, and it's like rocking. And it's like, I looked at one of my friends who had come to help with this, and we looked at each other like, what is happening? This thing is like alive. It's like thrashing against the tie downs. It's a very unique machine in that way. Certainly not a 737.
Yeah. It feels a lot like someone took not a muscle car, because those were the 60s, right? But a muscle car and said, let's rip out the interior and put in a Tesla interior.
Yeah, it's like a late 90s Dodge Viper. Has all this power, doesn't have anti-lock brakes, it has no power steering or traction control, kind of can drive straight if you know how, but mostly wants to drive sideways. And that's what a C-130 is like. It's a very extreme aircraft in that way.
Well, so that's, we've talked about the plane itself and how you started the modeling, but at the end of the day, people get into DCS to fly the airframe. So Shine, I want to hand over to you here, and let's start talking about the modeling of the flying and the flying of aircraft.
Awesome. Thank you. Would love to. So Matt, caveat here, my background is I've refueled off KC-130s in country when I was in an F-18, and then I jumped out of them when I was a midshipman at the academy. So fell out of them, didn't get to fly them. And the only prop flying that I did was a single turboprop, T-34 style, and then a dual turboprop, a C-12. So just lots of questions here. And I'll tell you what, Roger and BD, I'm going to rely on you guys to kind of, when I trip and fall down a Roger rabbit hole, start talking with dolphin clicks and all that, just pull me out and save the audience from the nerdery, if you don't mind. So I would appreciate that. But one thing I noticed, Matt, you said earlier, we talked about, or really you and Roger talked about the H with JATO versus the J. And the J overall, the power available is greater than an H model with JATO. Would you attribute that? Is there a primary causal factor? Would you say it's the Rolls-Royce engine over the Allison, or is it a prop thing? Or
yeah, so there is a new engine in the J relative to the H, but actually the engine itself produces actually the same amount of power at the shaft as the earlier engine. What was different about the C-130J is the propeller. And if you look up the C-130J propeller, it's like the scimitar kind of shape. It's this like twisted blade thing. It's got 6 props relative to 4 in the H model. But there were 2 really interesting things that happened with the development of that. And one was that, this is like 97, 96 era. And so this is the first time where like computer assisted design of something like an aerodynamic service like that was really viable at like a scale beyond just validation. You could actually experiment with things, and you wouldn't have to, start some job running and come back in a week to get the results. And so that design accounts for almost all of the power delta here. It's just the props. And so there are actually C-130Hs that have been retrofitted with what's called the NP2000 prop kit. I think that's what it's called. But it's a similar prop and produces a whole bunch more power as well, although not quite as much. But the other thing that's interesting about this aircraft is that it was the first fully FADEC driven turboprop.
And for our folks at home, FADEC, do you mind explicating that acronym?
Yeah, so FADEC is a computer that modulates the blade angle of the aircraft to produce some effect. And so what happens is in the C-130, the propeller is what's called a constant speed prop, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's spinning the same speed all the time, or very close to that. One exception is something called low speed ground idle, but that's mostly just to be a bit more civilized when you're on the ground. What the FADEC does is takes inputs from the power levers. And you'll note that I did not call them the throttles because they are not throttles. They do not control the amount of combustion that's going on. They are a suggestion. They are a suggestion to the FADEC, and then the FADEC takes that input and says, okay, well, in these particular conditions, the best way to produce what you asked for in terms of more or less power is to put the blade angle at some particular place. And that's how that plane works.
Okay, nice. So for me, you bring up a great point of it's a power control lever. PCLs are what run props, right? Whereas throttles are going to run jet engines. So throttle, now there could be a FADEC in there, full authority digital engine control. There could be a computer in series with the pilot. So the pilot makes suggestions, the computer makes sure the pilot doesn't die, right? And so you could have a PCL and then a computer to the engine, or you could have a throttle and a FADEC to the engine. And point being is, all of the props that I flew, there was no computer. It was just me trying to figure it out. So to me, a power control lever is going to command, like you said, the pitch of the prop, right? And then basically applies power. So the pitch is going to move the blade so that it either bites more or less air to maintain that constant propeller speed. So yeah, I love the way you explain that. That's pretty cool.
And that was actually one of the harder things to model, because to the degree that there is secret sauce in something like this kind of aircraft, the propeller is and the FADEC itself is definitely something that we were never able to get really good pubs on any of that. And part of that's actually because the Air Force doesn't own the pubs. This is an interesting story, is that actually the Air Force did not fund C-130J's development like they did for almost all other planes that at least Lockheed was making at that time. They actually, kind of famously, Lockheed came to the Air Force and said, hey, we're going to make a new C-130. We want to buy it. And they actually said no. They said, we don't. And Lockheed said, well, I bet you will later. And they self-funded the development of it. And actually, the Brits were the first people that actually bought C-130Js. So actually, Lockheed owns all the IP in a way that is not the case for other jets that they produce.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So it's been interesting.
Yeah, with the DoD, the enterprise, I'm used to internal research and development, right? IRAD funds. So that would be what you're describing there. The company funds itself and then eventually, hopefully, has a viable product the government buys. What we also saw would be FMS, foreign military sales. So in your case, your scenario, the OEM, the manufacturer goes to the DoD. They say, no, we don't want it. Okay, but can we sell it to Saudi and then let Saudi pay for the R&D, and then whatever the finished model is, which costs less, is going to be purchased by the DoD after the Saudis get it. So yeah, there's a couple strategies there, which is kind of cool. But I digress. So now the Herc to me is a Swiss Army knife, right? So just like you and Roger mentioned earlier, a whole bunch of missions. Would you say, though, with the J model, would you say there's one mission that's more sexy than the others? Like whether it be the tactical transfer?
Yeah. Well, the mission that I find the most interesting as a person flying it is low level, right? I mean, that's where the C-130 is a real blast. It climbs just like, it basically doesn't stall. And so you can be real low for a long time, and you have to be, because otherwise you'll get killed because you can't outrun anybody. And so, low level and then airdrop, to me are, I think, the two kind of most interesting ways to employ the plane, at least in DCS. I mean, I'm sure that those are probably also the things that the real world operators like to do the most. But doing airdrops is it's a very dramatic thing. You get there, you've got all the symbology in the HUD for CARP, but you've got like what's called the ASL, which is the azimuth release line, which is basically a bomb cross. CARP is essentially CCRP. That's really all it is. Just we're not dropping bombs, we're dropping things with parachutes. I guess unless we are dropping bombs, because you could drop a Moab, that's a thing you can do. It's a very cool sequence that culminates with getting a green light, and then stuff rolls out.
Which is awesome. And it sounds like, so that symbology you just mentioned for the HUD, so that would be continuously computed release point, right? CCRP and the azimuth steering line. We have those modes in the F-18. So I'm assuming the symbology is pretty similar.
It's definitely pretty similar. Yeah, I mean, you've got, it's go from having an LDI, normal CDI kind of readout to when you get to the turn point, you get past the turn point. To do CARP, there's basically 3 points. There's the turn point, that's where we turn onto the course, where we're going to do our drop. There's a slowdown point, which we're going to get on speed and configure. That might be, I don't know, depends on where you are, but somewhere like 5 miles to 7 miles, 10 miles out. And then you get to the DZ, which is where you're going to drop. And that might be the PI, but depending on wind or the other corrections that the CNI will have made to where you're going to release, could be a little bit left or right.
You make it sound very simple, but I mean, trust me, it's not. Like in the CCRP, like it's basically you set up something, then you put a thing on the thing, and you press the cool button.
Amen, brother. Amen. Put the thing on the thing.
Yeah.
But for the C-130, you have to like go through 5 screens, put everything in, then like fly exactly this exact profile, and it's super difficult. And I don't think anyone would doing the training missions for CARP. I don't think anyone would do it like drop it the first time and make it happen, even though it's done.
No, it's easy to screw it up, right? But the calculations can be very accurate. If you do that right, you're talking about be inside 50 feet, is kind of the precision level. I mean, of course, that varies a lot on what your drop altitude is, but typically you'll be doing a drop under 1,000 feet, right? So, especially in DCS where you don't have as much seat of the pants feel, if you look away and you look back up, if you're not pointed level, that might be the last thing you see. So it's a very exciting thing to do, especially in the game.
So what I smell, what BD is saying there, what I smell is a challenge, and that is a bombing derby. You guys familiar with that? Bombing derbies?
Tell me what a bombing derby is.
Exactly. So bombing derbies, we do it obviously in the Rhinos, but we have a lot of different cues, let's say. But I think it'd be pretty cool to see a bombing derby amongst you guys, see who can get closest to precision and accuracy, right? Get the tightest cluster, if you will, versus how close to the bullseye.
Yeah, definitely. No, we should get some missions like that and like a leaderboard or something.
First, you have to put the BDU Moab version, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we could do actual bombs. I guess that's the other thing. We could do actual bombs. Yeah,
there you go.
The Moab.
There you go.
Moab
that's pretty cool.
Blast.
Hey, circling back, when you talked about low level, Matt, you mentioned it just doesn't stall. So we're breaking the classical lift equations, right? And how are we doing that?
Yeah, so the C-130 has some obviously interesting flight characteristics with all the P factor and the torque from the props. But one of the things that it does is it produces something called blown wing lift. And blown wing lift is where the airflow just from the props itself flowing back over the back of the wing actually produces some lift. And what that means is that it basically doesn't stall. It will eventually, but you really, really, really have to keep at it because it'll just climb on blown lift more or less indefinitely. And so it's also something that causes the aircraft to be very difficult to handle in the event of an engine failure, actually, because not only have you lost the propulsion forward, you've also lost all the lift associated with the airflow from that engine in particular. So it's one of the things that makes a C-130 somewhat dangerous to operate, like in an engine out scenario. There's actually a system in the C-130 called ATCS, which essentially tries to save you from killing yourself by pulling power back from the offside engine relative to a failed engine to maintain some symmetry so that if you are, like, say, on a takeoff roll and you lose an engine, you don't immediately just roll right towards the ground because it's just such an extreme amount of power. The manual is sort of funny about this. It describes ATCS and it says, we're going to try to save you, but it probably won't be enough. And the line is something like, aggressive operator inputs will be required after it just described, the system that's supposed to mitigate it. It's like, but still, that will still not be enough to stabilize anything. So those are some some of the interesting characteristics with the
That is
prop.
basically bridling the beast, right? So to me, the critical engine for the 4-place engine is going to be the left one, right? Because of the P factor you mentioned.
That's right. And they're all spinning the same direction.
Yeah, that's cool. And so they all spin so that basically there's that asymmetric thrust generated on the prop disc. It kind of favors the right side of the disc, right? The downgoing blades. And then just for the folks at home, so what happens is the further that asymmetric thrust is pointed away from the middle of the plane or the CG, the worse it is. So if you can imagine the number 3 and 4 engines, which are on the right-hand side, that asymmetric thrust is even further away from the CG. So that causes that yawing. But anyway, dolphin click, sorry about that. So, okay, but how about handling? So this guy, so design reference mission you talked about, which is great. Now to me, it's got high wings, it's got big tires, it's got high mounted engines, all for FOD considerations, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things the plane does best is this short takeoff and landing stuff. I mean, you can, on the landing side, I mean, you get it all going the opposite direction as well. I mean, the plane will produce about 4,500 horsepower going forward, but almost 3,000 from the other direction. So that's a pretty powerful mechanism for that as well. But yeah, I mean, the whole mission of the aircraft is, to be able to sort of land almost anywhere and take off from almost anywhere with pretty silly amounts of weight. So as you point out, yeah, like those, that wing characteristic contributes in a huge way to that.
When you say land anywhere, how about landing on an aircraft carrier?
It can, and it has.
That's right? Real world, right?
It has real world, and I don't think that was even a J. So you would have been able to get stopped even faster if it had been a J. Yeah, it's pretty extreme. I mean, you can rotate this thing, and at least, I mean, you can get the nose off the ground with 70 knots or less. I mean, you won't be flying until maybe 90, but in a light plane, 80, 90 knots, you can get moving. It's one of those designs that kind of was done right the first time. There's been like really no modifications at all to the wing. I think exactly none to the wing. The fuselage has changed slightly, but not in any meaningful way. This is actually a Kelly Johnson design. If anybody knows who Kelly Johnson is, that he didn't get too many things wrong with regard to designing aircraft.
Yeah. And then down low, so thinking thick air, right? So you got good prop performance there. And then so to me, there's a spectrum of one end is stability, one end is maneuverability. Is he snappy when he rolls down low? Is he pretty sluggish?
Yes.
What is he?
No, it has very large control surfaces and it absolutely will roll quickly. And because of that, also just because of the P factor, you will be on the rudders. If you've been flying jets, this is a different thing. The nose, it's going to be Dutch rolling on you. It's going to be doing all kinds of things like that. But in exchange, you really can turn it. It really will turn. I mean, this is a plane that, you can pull 3-4 Gs, going 200 some knots, which is pretty silly. I mean, I don't think you'd want to be doing that too often, but it can.
When you bring up Dutch roll, so to me, that's Stevie Wonder on approach, right? So you're kind of roll yawing around. I know people can't see me at home, but, and so to cut that Stevie Wonder out, do you have a yaw damper or is it all aircrew input? How's that work?
The yaw damper is mostly your feet. There is a yaw damper attached to the AFCS, which is the automated flight control system, but it is not a very powerful device. I mean, it does not work very well. There's a lot of things about the aircraft and its flight characteristics that do not lend itself well to a very good automated flight control system. It's pretty good, but if the thing is going to be Dutch rolling all over the place, you've got all these, weird pitch moments when you drop the landing gear, and the autopilot's going to struggle with that too, and so too does the yaw damper. So the yaw damper will be active when you've got it in autopilot, but otherwise it's just your feet. And I think that's one of the design considerations with the plane that I've found interesting over the years is like, it is not a very opinionated plane. The plane does not make a lot of decisions for you. People will ask like, oh, it doesn't balance the fuel for you. And, you have to think about the context that this thing operates in. If you're flying an airliner and it's an Airbus, yeah, okay, you'd always want to balance the fuel, but this thing is not flying to Detroit from Cleveland or whatever, right? This thing's going to be flying somewhere else. You might have a whole bunch of holes in the fuel lines, or you might have all kinds of other considerations. And so the aircraft generally, at least my observation of its design, I've never talked to anyone that designed it, but seems to me to always be trying to bias towards predictability and not being too interventionist on behalf of the pilot.
That makes sense. So it's the aircrew, they're somewhat left up to their own skills. And then obviously, unlike airliners, the C-130 is dropping weight out the back. So the CG is changing, right?
That's right.
So, airborne.
It sure is.
Yeah. So hopefully it's not happening in airliners.
Pitch buck, yeah.
Yeah. So dropping the flaps, that kind of stuff. Okay, so ground handling though. So how's the tiller, man? I haven't used the tiller since KC-135, man.
Yeah. So the tiller was a real challenge in terms of modeling this, and there's a couple factors. One is the DCS as a sim does not have a particularly elaborate or kind of great ground tire interaction simulation, and everybody that plays DCS kind of knows that. And so you kind of got to pick between, how much side friction do you want to have? You've only got a couple coefficients you can tune, which is in complete contrast to the flight model side of things, but we can talk about that separately. But the thing that's a challenge, in one of the interesting design questions that we had to answer that is maybe most apparent with the tiller, is how do you bridge the feel and the controllability that you get with, like a, mechanically attached, hydraulically boosted, nose wheel, relative to somebody sitting there with like some kind of Xbox controller or whatever it is. And so you want it, the question that we asked a lot was like, how hard is the task in question in the real plane? And if it's not hard in the real plane, then it shouldn't be hard here. And if that means we have to, there have to be some puts and takes in terms of like, okay, the tiller doesn't quite work that way in real life, but like we want to simplify it in some way because people do not report that taxing C-130 is like a very hard challenge. But these are all the things that you got to think through, because when you're flying the real one, I mean, I've never taxied a real one, but I have in the sim. It's very easy. You feel the pressure build up and you can apply a little bit of counterforce. And, whereas in a sim like this, DCS, you observe that force after it's moved the nose in some direction that you didn't want, and now you're fighting it. Now the wheel's blocking. We've had all these people in the forums being like, I can't taxi it at all, and it's always the same answer. Do you have the wheel turn 90 degrees to the right? And
Whoops.
Yeah, because if so,
operator error. Yeah,
it's not going to turn. So the nose wheel is one of those things, where it's definitely harder in the game than it is in real life. But I think people have at least said that they think the ground handling is at least somewhat pleasurable. I don't know, Baltic, you've probably driven it around.
To interject really quickly there for people who haven't seen a C-130 cockpit or had the sim, you don't use the rudders like you do in most modern aircraft to steer. There's a little wheel to the left of the pilot that you turn just like a steering wheel.
And no pedals.
Yeah, but there's a good reason for that too, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to couple those things, and you wouldn't want to, because if you think about it, the tiller is going to rotate that wheel, I don't know, like 100 and some degrees, right? A whole bunch. Whereas your rudders, the amount of deflection there is quite small. To transition from the amount of rudder input that you would want to have, say, landing, that is not the amount of nose wheel deflection that you want, almost certainly. So they actually have to be separated. It would just be impossible to control in any other way, because when you land that thing, I mean, you're going to have a whole bunch of rudder in most of the time, and then get on the nose wheel when you get slower. But you also have rudder authority so early in this thing that you don't need to be on the nose wheel too much. I mean, you've got rudder authority at like 35 knots. So pretty much from there on, you're out of the nose wheel.
Talking about turning, I want to pivot just a little bit here and pull BD into the conversation, but still keep talking about the sim itself. So we've got multiple mission profiles that you can sim on DCS. And I want to get into both the challenges of doing this, Matt, and in terms of building the module, and then BD, the things you can build as you build scenarios for this. So specifically, Matt, you can go back into the body of the aircraft as the loadmaster, which gives you a whole new level of complexity in DCS. So let's just sort of jump off onto that as to how you incorporated that. And then BD, feel free to jump in on the kind of things that lets you do as a scenario developer. And then we'll also just let that sort of drive into scenario creation. Because I think, as we've already heard, there's some similarities to dropping cargo under a parachute or a Moab and delivering a bomb from an F-18. But that's like saying there's a similarity between driving an F-18 and an Airbus. There is and there isn't.
Yeah, so one thing that was really clear from the outset of this project was that we really had to make the cargo dynamic as engaging as we possibly could, because you're selling into a flight simulator, that is like, it's about fighter jets, and this is not that. So if you're going to be differentiated, you got to be good. And DCS did not have a very fleshed out logistics system some people would say it still doesn't have a really fleshed out logistics system, but I can't control that. What I can control is how that functions in the back of the cargo bay. And so I embarked on this ridiculous multi-year journey to implement my own rigid body physics engine to solve for contact response. Now, DCS does not really have collision physics. It has damage, right? Like two things hit in DCS and like one of them blows up or something like that. It does not really make an effort to do contact response. And that makes tons of sense because when airplanes crash into, I don't know, missiles or other airplanes in the air, everyone dies. Like there's not a whole lot of subtlety to that. Maybe they could fall apart in more or less accurate ways, but like as a general matter, when airplanes are involved in collisions, things get damaged. So it makes sense as to how they got there. But what that means also is that if I put a pallet or CDS bundle in the back of a C-130 and I want that to interact with the surface of the plane, that at least left to its own devices in DCS, that's going to start accumulating damage. The game is going to start saying damage, 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 damage. These two things are hitting. And so you can turn off the collision and you can just have it sit there. That's not very engaging either. But then there's another factor, which is that the nature of airdrop is fundamentally a physics equation. When you drop, especially CDS bundles, the way that works is those things are tied down with straps. You get to the drop zone. You want to get a deck angle of like 7 degrees or so. So you use flaps as required to get to that 7-degree angle. You're going about 130. And then a loadmaster is going to cut those straps and that thing is going to roll out under the force of gravity. It's going to roll. And if you are yawing around or you are rolling, it is going to get hung up or it's going to slide out sideways. It's going to do all kinds of things or not slide out at the speed that the computer has calculated ought to be what's called the ET or the exit time for that particular load. And these are all things that get factored into the calculation of where we want to drop this thing. So if I was going to get that right and actually have that really kind of robust simulation, we had to do physics back there. And so we do. So basically the way that C-130 works is that when things are in the cargo bay, they're doing ASC physics. We are controlling where they are each frame. And then we tell the game, this is the position in the cargo bay to move that thing visually, but we are controlling it. And there was a whole bunch of negotiations with ED to get them to let me do that. And then once it comes out the back and we actuate the parachute, then we transition it to DCS physics and it falls into the parachute like a normal thing. But the cool thing about a physics engine is that once you have that, you can start to do all sorts of other interesting things with it. Like you can, do hinge physics on the microwave, or you can do soft body physics on the ICS cable that hangs down behind the pilots. You can do physics on a loadmaster. You can have a body that doesn't fall through the floor and doesn't clip through the walls, and that's what makes it different from just a camera. I think a lot of people looked at this and said, oh, you move the camera around, and yeah, sure, but it's the collision part that is what makes it engaging, because if you're just clipping through the walls or whatever, it wouldn't be very immersive. So that's what we did. It was a huge amount of work to get it right, because synchronizing two physics systems without it introducing all kinds of like weird artifacting is a pretty hard thing. I don't recommend anyone do it. I don't know that anyone else would have a use case to do it. There's a couple of things in this project that don't make a lot of sense to do normally. Ray tracing, I guess, is the other one, but we could talk about that later if you guys want. But yeah, that's basically the story of it. We wanted the airdrop part to be really authentic, and that's what was required. So Baltic could make missions.
Yeah. No, the funny thing is, this is not an airplane, at least not in DCS, and probably not in real life. Don't just take things from point A to point B. It's just not about it. There's so many other things you can do with it, and it's just amazing. But one thing with the loadmaster in the back, he has an M4, and you can shoot the M4 from the back if you have the ramp open. But we need more ammo for him, Matt. Not only one clip, okay? That's just for the future.
No, it's true. It's definitely true. Yeah, he's got the M4 back there, but yeah, he needs a big rack of
exactly
more mags to grab off his
chest
rig.
Yeah.
But there's so many things you can do. Like flying low level is one thing, and then you can go obviously work with the special operation forces. You can go and drop stuff for them, or you can have a mission where you can drop them in Humvee because they need to get from point A to point B, and they don't have that means. And then you can go with the next mission, pick them up. It's like 30 clicks away from that place. landing in some really remote airstrip or even on the road. And there's so many things you can do, and just like sky's the limit here. So CSAR, medevac, you name it. So it's very, very engaging aircraft, and it's a tactical plane. It's not a transport plane per se. Of course, DCS is in a way limited in how far you can get with that. And we are waiting for some stuff like we can't use paratroopers now because we need to have a new infantry model, but it'll all come. And I think it's, I have quite a few ideas for missions for different maps. And again, different missions will be available on, I don't know, Kola or West Germany map than in Iraq or Afghanistan because of the length, the whole terrain, etc. But there's lots of ideas, and there'll be mission comings to most of the maps and short campaigns. They'll be included with the module, and you'll have fun with them.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, people talk a lot about the map size in DCS, and I've never really understood it. Maybe people, I don't know, maybe I'm different, but I'm not that interested in like flying from like Los Angeles to like Honolulu or something. You just sit, I don't know, like it's the taking off and the landing parts that are interesting, and whatever, whether you want to be on autopilot for 4 hours. I mean, I don't know. I guess you could. It's got a holding pattern flight director mode. You could do that. People want longer flights than C-130. That's my recommendation. Is set up a hold. You can traverse some section of a map as long as you want.
So with those opportunities for the mission profiles, and so we'll see more coming out in BD, I probably want to talk a little more about the tutorials, because as I said earlier, really appreciate them because you did really well. And it makes it, not only did I figure out how to start the C-130, which I want to say it was like an hour and a half the first time I did it, right? Like to get through everything and get everything started. But by the time I was done, I understood why I was doing everything, which I can't say was the case with every other DCS module I've played. Now, don't get me wrong, the documentation is there and I could do it, but I didn't really understand why I was doing it. So how did you go about doing that? Talk us through building those and how you built them.
Well, there's a funny thing like what Matt mentioned before. So I started with the manuals, like real life manual. And then when I was talking to the guys, the SMEs we had, and they said, oh, no, it's not that way. Why did you put it like in this way? I said, well, because the manual says so. Oh, no, it's not how we do it. So it was like all the time going back and changing stuff. And it was challenging, but then they helped me a lot because when they told me, okay, this is how we do it in real life, this comes from this, etc. So it was much easier than to kind of put everything in order and make it understandable. And having said that, I think there's lots of ways also to do things. So one SME would say, no, this is how it's done. And the other said, no, we never actually use this. So actually don't show it in the tutorial. So in the end, it was probably trying to kind of balance all the approaches. And also probably I didn't get everything right. I'll be updating it if I need to. But I wanted it to be for people to have fun playing it. So not sitting there listening to a guide and think, okay, now press this, press that. I wanted it to be more, I built it in a way like part of real flight. So you had banter between pilots, it's much more lively. And I thought that would be entertaining for people. And also all the 10 missions are kind of parts of one flight. So it's all from takeoff to landing, and it's the same crew, and it's all like in sequence going through the one flight, which I also think is something new because I guess none of the DCS aircraft has this approach.
Yeah,
right
not
now.
that I'm familiar with it. I found it really useful, especially learning something this complex. Rob and I have talked before, and I think you guys have talked about the F4, and for Rob, it's his summer of the F4, and I've flown a lot of F4 this summer because of Rob, and I can sort of start it in my sleep now. But it took a lot of going through the checklist and a lot of going back and forth, and then even some flying and forgetting something or messing something up and going, oh, that's why I should have done that. But yeah, I think you did an excellent job, BD, of the banter explaining why you're doing the various things. So it's very easy to jump into. I guess I have two sort of related questions for you, BD and Matt, together are the community response and how that affects future plans. I'll just ask both together and then step back and let you guys talk and I know it's relatively new, but how has the community responded to a transport aircraft? Because on the surface of it, right? Like, okay, I'll trail my colors here, as it were. I had no desire to go to an amphibious ship. when I got my orders, right? I wanted cruisers and destroyers. I wanted shooters. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to follow the career path that said after my first cruiser, I had to go to a FIB. No, that's not happening. But now having gotten in the C-130, I'm like, this is really cool. And you start to realize that delivering anything on time, on target with a high level of professionalism is the same. So that's part one, is community response. And with that, what is the ability and the plan to expand the module into the various C-130 variants? And I'm sure everyone, the first thing they're going to say is AC-130, which is probably the hardest one to do, I would imagine. But, and I'll just drop this one, the MC-130. If people aren't really familiar with what MC-130s do, I think you could cornerstone an entire in-depth campaign around an MC-130. And I'll step back and let you guys talk about those two things.
Yeah. So, I mean, the community reaction has been great. With almost no exceptions, people have just said that they think it's great and that they love it, which is just awesome to hear. Because you work on this thing, making game things is weird and very different from making any other piece of software. In normal software development, you carve out what a minimum viable product would be. You know, you do the smallest thing you possibly can, and then you get people involved. You get testers, you release it to the world, and you then say, okay, tell me where to go next. And games are completely different. In games, you work in silence, isolation, and secrecy until you have made the entire thing, and you can't undo it or change any parts of it. It's too late. And then you come out to the world and you say, hey, look, here's what I made. I hope you like it. And, it's like 3-4 years of work. And so there's always some part of it at the end where it's not like it's stressful, but it's just, you want people to see what it was that you made the way that you see it, at least. You want people to understand how detailed the systems are. I mean, there's things that this plane does and simulates that people that are not C-130 aircrew would never notice or care. But then sometimes there are, and there was some guy that he found some bug with like the pressurization system in like this one little edge case of one pressurization mode of like 6. And he was like, but I also went through all the other pressurization modes, and and it's like really, really, really nice job of the pressurization system. And it's such a funny thing because it's a virtual airplane and we're talking about virtual pressure, like it's not real, but that's the kind of thing that we did. We did actually simulate. I mean, I've got like PID controllers closing and opening a safety valve, and PID controllers opening, some other regulator, and auto rate. There's like 6 types of auto rate modes. There's all these things. And so it's really exciting to see people appreciate that stuff. And I know that, I speak for everybody else who's involved in it, that the reaction's been, way better than we even could have hoped. In terms of like where we go with it from here, the MC-130 that you mentioned, that is coming. That is planned. If you have bought a C-130 already, you are getting an MC-132. That is not, it's going to be a free add-on. I don't have a date for that yet, but we're not, I don't think it's like a year away, nothing like that. So that variant brings 2 main things. That's the special operations variant. So it's a short body C-130J. So the variant that people are flying now is what's called the Dash 30, the long, some people call them the slick, although you could have a short slick actually, I guess technically. And what that refers to is just that it's doesn't have the refueling pods on the wings, which are very draggy, and it also doesn't have the EO-IR pod. So the EO-IR pod is one of the big additions, the targeting pod for DCS parlance, and you get another HDD, another big display to put the EO-IR pod on, and then air-to-air refueling is the other thing. Both receiving fuel with the boom, but also delivering fuel with the basket. So I think that'll be a really fun thing in multiplayer, especially to do player-to-player AAR. And there's some stuff that we have to get ED to do for the AAR piece, but that'll be coming soon, and hopefully that'll be even more to do.
And if I might jump in, like on the popularity front, I think I've been watching it from when it was announced, and the reaction of people was amazing. I mean, that's many more people interested in that I've seen interested in other fighter jets or other modules. And I think the reason behind it is, DCS is pretty small community. Like talking about computer games, it's small. It's a niche because you have to be quite kind of weird to want to read 600 pages of manuals, and they got all the stuff like hardware, etc. And a lot of people who fly DCS are former military soldiers, and many of them had some one way or another were involved with C-130, even jumping out of it or being transported by it. So and that was very kind of prolific in the comments we've seen. So, I've been riding in one, etc. So that's why they were much more keen to trying it than maybe some fighter jets or some other modules. So I think that might be one of the reasons.
So from a consumer point of view, in developing campaigns, right? And I don't know how viable this is, but the thing that comes to my mind as an ops planner, as a staff ops planner in my former life, is how viable is it to start to combine modules into a campaign? So different aircraft types. And I understand some people don't want to buy the different aircraft types, but what's in the back of my mind is something where you have to achieve, like, let's say you have to deliver, and I understand we can't do the paratroops now, but you got to deliver the Rangers to take the airfield that are now going to, serve as the base for the next series of the campaign, or even something like Eagle Claw, right? Where the failed Iranian hostage rescue attempt, where maybe you have to deliver guys to a place and then provide them air support with a different airframe. Is that something, I don't think it's something we've seen before, but now that we have such a divergent type of aircraft, is that something it's potentially in the future?
It's potentially doable for the multiplayer, and it's been done, but you can't have campaigns, like full campaigns that are sold that are multiplayer. But what you could do is to have the same story told from different perspectives. So you have the C-130, let's say 10 missions where you really send those guys, they build their FOB or whatever, then you support them, etc. And then in another campaign, you do the same thing, but from A-10 point of view. So you see the same missions that you've flown as a C-130 pilot, and then you support them as an A-10 pilot, etc. So you can probably build a few campaigns together that tell the same story, but from different perspectives than Apache or whatever you want.
All right. So I'm looking at time here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Matt, let me ask you, this is your baby. What are you most proud of? Have we talked about the aspect of the module that you're most proud of yet? Or is there something we haven't talked about that you really want people to know about?
Well, I think I think the thing that I'm most proud of is just the overall system's accuracy from end to end, because it's really, with these kinds of things, kind of all or nothing. Like I can't tell you, hey, the APU simulation is really good, but the engines are bad. Like it doesn't work that way. It's kind of, either it all flows together or it doesn't. But I think from a technical perspective, the thing that I would be the most proud of are the ray traced reflections. I don't think that there's a game. I'm not aware of any precedent for something like that, of a third-party add-on shipping a core graphics feature that is exclusive to just that product. And one of the things about the C-130, or about, I guess, aircraft in general, is that they are bright, reflective places. They're glass, glass is reflective, and DCS glass has always felt a little bit lacking to me. And I decided that I wanted to have this particular feature, and so we went on this multi-year escapade to basically run a graphics renderer inside of DCS, but separate from it. And so what we do is we create a Vulkan renderer, and we share resources with the DirectX 11 renderer, which is what DCS uses. And then we write our reflections back into the game, but they're completely separate things. I'm not sure that there is another cross graphics API renderer in the world, not because no one else could do it, but just you would never want to. It's such a difficult thing to do. But it really, to me at least, adds just a level of immersion that is kind of hard to go back from once you sit there and you see the glare shield reflecting, or the power levers moving. It's just all of those things just really add to the immersion. And it was just, technically, it was an enormously difficult thing to do.
Cool. Yeah. So technical aspect, and then from the player aspect, Shine, I'm sure you've experienced that, right? In an actual cockpit. I know even small boats with MFDs now, which they do have screens like that, man, you can turn and be like, oh man, what did I just, I guess for the average listener who's never done any of those things, you get the sun wrong on your display screen in your car, right? And you're like, oh man, what's going on now? So with that degree of accuracy, I don't know if you can talk about that. Is there a vision of military commercialization here and training for the military?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, these things are obviously, you can't plan for them to happen. getting the military to buy anything from anyone is a very hard thing to do. But we kind of took a perspective that we were going to just make the best C-130 that we could at first, and then things would work out eventually. Over what period of time that is, I don't know, but I know that there's a lot of countries that operate these planes. They're very expensive. Sims are expensive. Those break. There aren't enough of them. There's pilot shortages all over the world. And, this is something that has real training value. It really could. If you need to, even if you're a maintainer, you need to get certified for engine runs, something like that. I mean, I can, give you a VR headset, sit there. I guarantee you will be more comfortable when you sit in the real thing, or even when you sit in the, the Class D sim, to get final sign off. And I think that's where the training value is just in that familiarization. But it, of course, has to be really accurate. If it's not, then it's negative value. But we think it's close enough, and a lot of guys, we've got guys that are instructor pilots now, and we've actually got 2 people that went through IP school, and they both used it for home study. I mean, they really did. They said, look, there's like a couple things that I don't do that often, and to be able to sit there. I mean, they're not going to be doing, flight stuff with it, but all the heads down computer data entry management of the FMS, that's the stuff where I think, it can be a real valuable training tool. So we'll have to see where it goes. There's definitely been more than a few conversations with different people in places. I obviously can't say and won't say more than that, but if it happens, that's awesome. If it doesn't, that's fine too. I don't think if you start a project like this because you want to get the defense contract, I think you're probably not going to, and it would be not a great motivation. So it's more that it even, could accomplish that I think is something that we're proud of.
Yeah. So we're getting ready to round out. So Sean, I was going to go to you next and some closing thoughts. And I think you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Question, actually. So Matt, have you heard of chair flying, the term chair flying?
I think I have. I don't know. You tell me.
For the folks at home, when I was at test pilot school, we had a couple months where we'd fly a plane a week, and they were very different. So what we had to do is we got the instruction manual, and then we had a emergency exam quiz on Tuesday. So Monday was the instruction manual, Tuesday the emergency quiz, Wednesday we had to get ready and we flew it, or Thursday we flew it, and then Friday we wrote a report on it, and then we rinsed and repeated the next week. Anyway, chair flying was huge because I had to visualize. So I would, my mind's eye check muscle memory of, okay, this switch is this far away from me over here. And so anyway, so what you're showing me here is the system fidelity is such that this would be a huge Benny to, and you said the IPs, right, going through the IUT, I guess, right, the instructor unit training, but also just for the student pilots that are just learning the first time, especially ground ops. So we call these part task trainers.
Yes,
you sit on the ground.
I've seen them. They're not very good.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But you need the fidelity of the systems. And I flip this switch and it has to be in this certain sequence to, fire up the systems appropriately. So that would be huge. The other thing is academia. So me teaching aero at school, we had a control theory course, and we had a very rudimentary sim, and we could change the control laws, and then the students would see how much the maneuverability changed. So I think what you have here is a fantastic, I would call it a teaching aid for human factors analysis, right? You got all these switches you got to flip, and there's a dude next to you. So it's really crew resource management. And so I could see some maybe high school, but more college level academic courses could totally benefit from what you've designed here. I'm extremely impressed. I'll say that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the one of the things that I've found interesting is like in some of the conversations I've had with folks that running innovation programs at various squadrons or other things, is this idea of this procedural trainer. And I think what's interesting to me about that is just that I don't know. I mean, I know that there's varying perspectives on this, but to me, I think like the thing that is the most important for learning is like unstructured learning, where you can do it wrong and see what happens, whereas these other things that are often the kinds of products that we end up quote unquote competing with when we go into these conversations is, they are strictly on rails. It's you press the APU and it's going to be, NG 100 and, 18 seconds every time, all the time. It doesn't matter if it's cold, hot, anything, you can do whatever you want. It's always going to be exactly the same way. And I understand that there's a philosophy there that is trying to not get people to even engage in like the wrong way to do stuff. But to me, it's the flexibility of the cause and effect of it is hopefully where people see value.
Awesome. BD, any final thoughts here as we close out?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot. I mean, just if you haven't tried it, do try it. It's don't be afraid that it's not a transport plane. It's really a tactical plane, and it's a lot of fun.
And BD, I appreciate, for those of you who don't know, BD is home based in Poland. So you are middle of the night your time for us, and I appreciate that.
It's only 2:30 a.m.
That's just time
Gonna
to
go
start
out and hit
getting
the
up in the
town.
military, right? Yeah. All right, Matt, pride of place for you. Any last closing thoughts?
No, just thanks for having me. And, I hope people are enjoying it. And if you think about buying it, you should.
I'll second that. No financial stake in it, but go grab it. So, all right, with that, everyone, thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with more great content, including Shine on the aero portion of the 130, me on the history, and all sorts of other great content too. So we will talk to you soon. Until then, Roger out. The views and opinions presented here are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent the views of the Department of Defense, the United States government, or civilian employers. We at Authentic appreciate your subscribing to our channel. If you'd like to help us bring more content and grow the channel, leave a rating and a review on your listening platform of choice and tell a friend. Thanks for listening.